Okay. So welcome back, everyone. We've had a little bit of a hiatus here. I'm coming back from paternity leave, and we had before that we had December, which was always December. So getting back in the swing of things, and because we're entering into Noah and the flood story, there are some core concepts in the discussion of the flood that are very important. And so I kind of wanted to revisit those now. There are things we went over the first 3 sessions. So we won't do 3 sessions worth of stuff, but just a quick little overview of those things, get everybody up, refresh everybody's memory, so we have a nice full discussion of the flood. So starting with what we discussed in session 1 is the idea of fact versus truth and history versus myth. But has everybody been here since the very beginning? We all? No? Okay. So you guys can haven't heard this yet either, so that's good. So this word can be problematic because this word can mean 2 completely opposite things. When we use it in modern terminology, how do we usually use it?
A myth is a falsehood.
Falsehood, right? Well, it's just a myth, right? We dismiss it. It's untrue. It's a falsehood.
Story, but not true.
Yeah, right. But in the study of religion, it has a completely opposite definition, in that a myth is a story that partakes in truth. It may not be factual, but it is full of truth. And sometimes in our post-enlightenment society, in our post-enlightenment brains, thought processes, we conflate these 2 things, right? The thing is true, it has to be factual. And this comes from a sort of scientific mindset that anything that is true has to be verifiable, demonstratable, repeatable, etc., right? But that is not the mindset for most of humanity, for most of our time here on Earth. The reality is that most people in the ancient world were far more concerned with truth than they were with facts. So much so that even this distinction, history versus myth, gets blurred a little bit in the ancient world. We like to pretend, like to think, like to believe, like to hope that history is really bound to fact, right? Anybody who went through, middle school history will tell you how dry and boring it can be when you have to memorize, 40 different dates of things, right? Which are just facts, like, the War of 1812 started in 1812 or whatever it was, Actually, I think it did actually. It started in 1811. Right. Right. Yeah. But yeah. All right. So there you go. We're already off to a bad start. But the reality is, of course, we know that when we read histories, history is told by the victors, as they say, and most history writers have a narrative that they're writing into, right? So we have sort of cold hard facts like dates, names, etc. But the interpretation of that stuff gets kind of biased by a viewpoint of the historian. This was very much true in the ancient world, where you have, if you read some of the ancient histories, they tend to have pretty outlandish claims, things that we wouldn't believe could possibly be factual. But what they're trying to do is trying to get across the concept of a thing, the truth of a thing, the experience of a thing through their writing, more than the actual circumstance. So if we say something like, the sun stopped in the sky and did not move, right? Well, did the Earth really quit rotating, right? Did everything, at which point the Earth would just fall apart? Did that really happen? Or was it a very long, hard day? Was it one of those days, like the longest day, for example, like D-Day, the longest day? And it seemed like it took forever because of the horrors taking place there. Let me pin mine so we don't have just Nancy Green's beautiful face the whole time. Hi, Nancy. When we talk about myth and religion, we are talking about stories that try to convey a truth by trying to convey the experience of it, the experience of the event, or the experience of a particular kind of reality. And typically speaking, myth will be sort of the center of experience, this core kernel of a myth. And the experience of the myth, as you hear the myth, often takes place in the form of a spiral. And that the person, the devotee, the seeker, the religious person enters into this spiral, this walk around the central myths of their faith. And they're trying, the path of the seeker is to get ever closer to these core truths in the center, right? Myth, truth, etc. But because their experience constantly changes, their perspective on life constantly changes. Their perspective on the myth changes. Because one of the aspects of myth is that it's interactive. That a fact is just a static, dead thing that sits there, right? A myth, because it contains truth, because it is trying to convey an experience, it itself is meant to be experienced. And so experience is a two-person activity. So the devotee who is experiencing the myth, and when they do so, they're projecting themselves into the myth, and the myth reflects back into them.
Can I say something?
Please.
That reminds me of the labyrinth.
Yes. The labyrinth is a development of the spiral idea. The spiral is probably the most ancient symbol in religion. You see this symbol throughout all religions, scrawled on cave walls, carved into rocks, carved into trees, whatever you have. And the labyrinth is absolutely a development of that, an acknowledgement of this, right? So anyone who's ever walked a labyrinth will sort of know of this. But it is an interactive thing. That you are, maybe when you're hearing these stories, maybe you're not actually walking a labyrinth, but at least mentally that is the process while you're hearing these things. And that, so this marker is a fact, right? It's kind of an experience. But if I try to interact with it, I can say, oh, well, this marker says Expo on the side of it, right? And here, no, it doesn't. It doesn't say anything on the side, right? And so, depending on my perspective, when I hear of this marker, I experience this marker. When I project myself into it, it changes, right? In the same way that if this is a central myth, and we're walking this spiral, our perspective on it will change as we rotate around it, right? And I want to really try to get us to disconnect from the idea that myth is a falsehood. And please hear that before I say this next line, that let's look at the myth of the resurrection, right? I firmly believe that Jesus died on the cross and was resurrected in body, right? Firmly believe that is a fact, it happened, etc. But there's also a dead fact. It doesn't, that core event doesn't actually mean anything. It's a cool story. Really? Somebody raised from the dead? Huh, how about that? But there are also, other fabulous tales out there. The resurrection has deep truth in it because it has resonance. It means something deep. And it is such an immense event. It is such a multifaceted, multi-layered event that it cannot be conceived of fully by a finite mind, which is why we also call these things mysteries. Mystery is something that cannot be known. It is ineffable. You cannot put words to it that can contain it, that can encapsulate it. It is, if not eternal and infinite, or certainly beyond the scope of the human mind, the finite mind to conceive. So therefore, a mystery cannot be explained in its totality, but must be experienced. And here again, we're walking this path of this mystery, of this myth, of this truth. Mysteries of the resurrection, mysteries of the incarnation, mysteries of the Eucharist, mystery of baptism, right? These are the mysteries of our faith. And all of those things, we could talk for ages about them, and Lord knows people have, but the reality is, unless you're experiencing them, you don't have an actual understanding of them, right? And the experience of them isn't a one-time thing. But you might have been baptized once, but it takes your entire life, and I suspect longer than that, entire eternity of your living being, to actually fully experience your baptism. And depending on where you are in your walk in life, your baptism will mean something different to you. Like as a baby, you're just getting wet, you don't know why, you're pretty upset about it, you'll probably cry. And then you'll just get distracted by a light and you're fine, right? Teenager might be close to the same thing, you don't know. Like they may not care, or maybe they do. But I think at some point, it might start meaning something to you, right? You might start pondering it, you might start developing your life around it. So yeah, any thoughts on that? Yeah.
Sometimes when I have read in the New Testament, Paul's writings about the mystery, I've always kind of thought, I'm not really sure how it applies here. Is mystery sort of an extension of the Old Testament view of a myth, or the two not related at all? How does myth in the Old Testament relate to mystery in the New Testament?
Yeah, very
That's a
good.
good example about talking about Christ and the mystery of the Holy Spirit and things like that.
Right.
How does all that relate?
Good. Yeah, so mystery comes from the Greek word mysterion. It's a really direct translation of the Greek. And what the word Paul is borrowing there is from the various mystery religions taking place at the time. Things like the Eleusinian myths, Mithraic faith, where people would be sort of indoctrinated, taught certain things to sort of lay the foundation for ways to think about things. And then they would experience some sort of initiation, typically, in which time they would have some sort of experience. Oftentimes there are mood altering substances involved, or deprivations of some sort or whatever. We don't really know what happened in these mysterious events because they were mysterious events and were not allowed to be written down or told about, right? But we know these things happen. People will go there and have this life-changing experience and set them off on a different path. So that's what Paul is writing about here. And I would say that they do, I mean, religious events are almost always mysterious because the person experiencing them oftentimes cannot actually convey what the experience is. For example, love, right? You can talk all day long about what love makes you do or the emotions that love brings up in you. But unless you can actually feel love, unless you've been in love with someone or love someone, you can't really fully express what love is, right? An experience of God or otherwise a religious experience is the same way. And so the Bible is full of things like the burning bush or the pillar of cloud or God walking in sort of like giant bodily form past Moses, or the transfiguration on the Mount, or these appearances of angels. Angels are a great example, where you have Ezekiel talk about wheels within wheels, fiery wheels within wheels. Like, what does that mean? Or sort of wings upon wings covered in eyes. Like, what is that even? You know, so you're trying to get across in some sort of verbal form this experience that can't really be explained. It's like trying to talk to someone about a dream almost, right? Like you can't really get across a dream by telling weird stuff about it, right? You wake up with a different feeling of having had an experience, but you know, oh, well, these crabs had pitchforks and they were marching around the sandcastle and there was a fried egg on top. And the person's like, what? But for you, it may have been a very deeply moving experience for some reason, right? It's the same thing. Because these things speak to the very core of our being, the very essence of us, they are beyond surface ability to talk about.
Okay, so they're not really the same necessarily. Myth and mystery.
No, I would say they're the same. I would say, I'm sorry if I did a poor job of speaking to your answer then. I would say that they're right along with each other. That a mystery is, the myth is the core concept at the center of a mystery. That's what I would say.
All right, so then when Paul and Silas were in the Roman jail and the angel appeared and took them out of the jail, would that be more related to a myth or to a mystery or a combination of the two?
Okay, so, all right. So for those who can't hear online, make sure we can hear. The question is, you know, the angel coming up and freeing Paul and Silas from the prison and setting them free. Is that a myth? Is that a mystery? What is that? Well, it could have been a fact, right? Just a cold hard fact of an angel showing up, unlocking their bounds, getting them out of prison, etc. It could be the overall experience of someone who had a messenger from God that sustained them through a prison and gave them liberation from that prison. It could be the way that God worked through that time that saw them freed from that experience. You know, so the myth of that story, the truth of that story is God freed me. God liberated me. right? That's the experience. The actuality of where were they imprisoned, how were they imprisoned, were they wearing shackles, were they not, how long were they there, whatever. Those are the facts of the situation. The core experience there is I was in prison and God freed me from that prison. And that can be allegorical, it can be factual, it can be anything or in between the two things. Probably somewhere between the two things, right? And people who are in prison are going through a spiritual crisis as well. And to be freed from that prison is a spiritual event, right? You know, Shawshank Redemption, he emerges from the sewer lines, you know, in the rain. That's the epiphanical moment, right? He's free, he's liberated finally after all these years. So that is the truth, that is the myth, that is the mystery. And all the rest is dressing, right? And so when we talk about studying the Bible, what we're trying to sort of get to is this core kernel, right? For example, the Exodus, right? So the Exodus, the times when the Jews were removed from their bondage in Egypt, right? So that's been challenged, the actual historicity of that has been challenged by some people, that it may not happen at all, may have been very cut and dried, it may have been, there's all kinds of concepts there, or may have very well happened, right? But it is so central to the identity of the Jewish people, it doesn't really matter. The factual ins and outs of it don't really matter so much as it is a foundational conception of Jewish culture, identity, etc. And when we talk about, you know, you yourself are interacting with this myth. So a white middle-aged dude may read that and have some sort of high-minded conceptions about it, like, oh, isn't that nice for them, and like that, right? A Jewish person reads that and thinks that is central to their identity. And an African American might read that, and certainly they did during periods of enslavement, and find themselves in that story, right? So the story of the Exodus became central, a simple sustaining concept in African American theology, both during period of slavery and post-slavery periods, because that emancipation, that freedom, that liberation from slavery through God speaks to someone, whoever is in slavery, right? But the particularities of it, how you actually connect to it and why you connect to it might be different. But again, the core concept is God. What does that mean? Any thoughts on that? Any ideas?
I guess it's how we interpret it.
Sure.
Different interpret it.
Right. And you know, what do we need to
That's
hear from
getting
it?
back to faith. What we believe.
Right. You know, what do we need from it at the time? Right. As we sort of walk the spiral of our lives, what do we need from it? How does it speak to us? Does it speak to us? You know, if you're someone, you know, I've been extremely blessed in my life. I was born a white man at a time when white men have it pretty good. And, you know, I've been poor in my life, but not sort of soul-breakingly poor. I've never had a crushing addiction in my life. So these things that people experience as shackles, as bondage, as enslavement, etc., I haven't had too much experience with that. So when I read Exodus, I'm like, okay, whatever. Like I can sort of skim through Exodus and not really feel the depth of it as much, right? Whereas someone who has experienced those things I mentioned may find far more meaning in it.
I can say the same thing, but not as a white man.
Hmm.
Well, I can kind of relate to that too. As a Gentile, into God's truth.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of adaptation to some of this.
So how do you look at it?
Yeah. So as we're studying the Bible, we can talk about particularities of whatever's happening here. But the real reason we talk about the language, the historical setting, the time period, the audience, who's telling the story, etc., is to try to peel back the layers that these particularities, because those aren't really the parts that are going to change your life. They're interesting, they're fascinating, I think. Obviously you do too, because you keep showing up. But the real point is to peel away all that stuff until you get to the core thing, right? You're peeling back the rind until you get to the flesh that actually will sustain you and feed you and nourish you, right? But by sort of removing these layers, we actually figure out what the actual kernel is to get to. And we see by the person telling the story, the audience, all those other things, what they're projecting into this myth and what's projecting back out into them. And it helps us to connect to the story. All right, got all that? Any other questions? Oh. Next, move on to session 2. Move on to session 2, and sure, yeah. And we talk about who wrote the Bible. So we are discussing Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible, and therefore part of the first 5 books of the Bible, right? What is this called? First 5 books of the Bible? Torah, right? Or books of law, or in the Greek, Pentateuch. Pentateuch, yeah. Which is a pretty straightforward name. It always means 5 books, right? Torah literally meaning law or instruction. Right. So who were set up here, 5 books of law. Yeah, that's right. So when we talk about who wrote these first 5 books, beyond this, the entirety of what Christians often call the Old Testament, the Jewish people would call the Tanakh, right? Which is shorthand, stands for Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, the law, the prophets, and the writings. Okay. But right now we're concerned about these first 5 books, and namely Genesis. So who wrote these books? Do you all remember the letters here? This is part of what's known as the documentary hypothesis. I'm sure that Marina could easily teach this standing on her head by now, since she's been doing EFM for a while. Whoever else has done EFM, I'm sure knows this backwards and forwards. Do y'all remember the authors? All right, so the first one is known as J. Yahwist. Right. This is the Yahwist author. So called because when referring to God, he uses the name Yahweh. Right. And the reason this is J and not a Y is because most of the early biblical scholars are all German. And so this is a German J and therefore a Y. Right. This person wrote somewhere around the 10th century BCE. And this understanding of of God is very anthropomorphic. And and a very sort of, can't use the word primitive, but much more early understanding of how gods work. And so this person is speaking from a polytheistic or henotheistic standpoint. You remember the difference between these two things? So poly means many, right?
Right.
So poly is many. So this is many gods versus heno. Heno is the Greek word for first. And so henotheism is when you have lots of other gods. You think there's plenty of other gods hanging out there, but you worship one above all the others. And this is what the Hebrew religion was until very late, like soon before Jesus came, sort of late. The first actually monotheistic statement in the Bible was written in the book of the prophet Isaiah. So it was post-exilic, or right during the exile or post-exile period. And this doesn't get fully developed until much later. So you have people speaking of gods. People firmly believe that Marduk and Osiris and Zeus and whoever else were out there, they believed they existed, but they believed that there were somebody else's gods, and that our God, Yahweh, is our God, the God of the Jews, or the God of the Hebrew people at this point, God of our covenant, the God of Abraham, literally the God of Abraham, Abraham's God, and therefore as Abraham's descendants, he is also our God. So it's a relational God, not a God over all things. But it gets elevated more and more as their understanding of God develops. So this earliest conception of Yahweh is as a storm deity. He is anthropomorphic, so he looks like a dude. We talked before about usually the principal deities of whatever pantheon you have are storm deities because they're mighty, they have power, the thunder breaks the sky apart and you know their power. They're up there in the sky, and they also inseminate the earth. So the earth is almost always a feminine deity. The sky, or the storm deity, is almost always a male deity because semen drips down from the sky, hits the earth, and stuff grows out of it. Right. And so your most leaders of pantheons, storm deities, sky deities, whatever, they live either in the sky somewhere, or they live on mountaintops, hilltops, etc., elevated in some way. This is why when people experience God early on, they experience him on Mount Horeb, Mount Ararat, tops of mountains, right? They're like on the mountaintops to experience him. That's where he lives. You talk to God, you gotta go where he lives. All right, any thoughts on that? So the way you know the core signaling of this Yahwist writer is if you see this, but you won't ever see this. What do you see instead written in the Bible? You recall?
God in all caps.
No.
Lord in all caps.
Lord in all caps. Yeah.
I've also, so what does it mean when you see God in all caps like that?
I've never seen God in all caps like that.
I don't know, I was reading some other thing. So,
Uh,
I can't remember now what it is.
I mean, Bibles do all kinds of things. So I've never had a verse of the Bible that capitalized all caps.
Okay.
But Lord, certainly, you see that all over the place. And you see like a large capital L followed by a smaller capital O-R-D.
Right.
Right. And the reason this is so is because Yahweh is considered a very holy name. So much so that Jewish people will typically not ever say the name. In Judaic religion, back in the good old days, in the temple days, the name of Yahweh was only pronounced one time a year. And that was done by the high priest inside the Holy of Holies. He would speak the name of God. If you had a good priest, he would live through the experience, priest worthy of speaking the name of God. He would live. If you had a bad priest, he would start dead at the moment. A dead priest, that's how you knew you had a bad priest. It's a much easier process than now. There's no committees, no councils. You just know. Hey, Brandon, say Yahweh. See what happens. And then you know. By the way, Yahweh. So the name of Yahweh is considered very holy, so therefore they will say it. So what they do say in their liturgy is Adonai, which literally means Lord. Adon is actually Lord. Adonai is superlative form. Lord of Lords, Lord. Outside the liturgy, if you ever hear a Jewish person say Hashem, it's the same thing, right? So if it's liturgical, they'll say Adonai. If not, Hashem, which literally means the name. Ha is article, Shem is name, the name. Or Hashem Adonai, the name of the Lord. So, as an aside, which I think is interesting, one of the names of God that we have sort of received is derived from this. Because in the Hebrew, if you're reading the Bible in Hebrew, which is a consonantal language, but in the text that we have, more often than not, it's pointed with the vowel pointings in it as well. It's called a Masoretic text that did that. So rather than, again, because it's such a holy name, they will never write it out as it is. So they take the vowel pointings of Adonai and they stick it into here. And these are the same thing as W's in Hebrew. And again, we're talking about the Germans figuring this out initially. So this is where we get the name Jehovah from. So Jehovah was never actually a name of God. Jehovah was the textual representation of the name of God in order to avoid actually using the name of God. Your thoughts on all this? Right. Next up, E, which stands for? No P yet. E. Elohist. Very good. Elohist. If J is Yahwist and E is Elohist, why are we calling E Elohist? Because this person is using the name of God as God, right? It refers to God as the Hebrew name for God. So this is the 9th century BCE. And by the way, this isn't a monolithic culture writing in succession of each other. This is multiple cultures, tribes, etc., all within the Semitic bloodlines that are developing their stories, right? So even though this is a later writer, it isn't like the Yahwist got replaced by the Elohist. But this person refers to God as God. And so the core Hebrew word for God is El. El is just lowercase g, God. Eloh is the just sort of longer form of that, so nothing special about it. And then you get to Elohim. As we talked before about Elohim, Elohim is what's called a superlative plural. This im ending is the masculine plural ending in Hebrew. And it can either mean, therefore, plural gods, so literally lowercase g gods, or because he uses superlative plural, the pluralization can also mean the biggest, best version of a thing, the gaudiest god out there. Right? So this can be then, therefore, the capital G God. And more times than not, when you're reading the Bible in Hebrew, you're getting this understanding of it, right? But it's worth a discussion because, again, we are still in a polytheistic / henotheistic society. It's worth a discussion also to say that they mean gods, because the structure of Hebrew language, it becomes a question, right? We can discuss that. But without a doubt, for the most part, they mean capital G God. But when, as we read already in first part of Genesis, let us make them in our image. Let's make man in our image. Elohim said, let's make God in our image. So if the verbs are plural, what does that mean? Right. So, any thoughts on that? So here again, if you have someone, also the conception of God is far more transcendent or immanent. The idea that God is sort of all around us, or God is up in heaven looking down on us, kind of more removed from us, doesn't look like a dude. And by the way, it's always a dude, right? Like, we don't want to name God, we'll sure as hell gender, right? Which is its own discussion and problem. But yeah, this idea of Elohim is a little bit more closer, perhaps, to our understanding of a transcendent deity. Your thoughts? All right, what's next? D. Deuteronomist. I will give you one guess what Deuteronomist wrote. Deuteronomy, yeah. So this person wrote somewhere in the 8th to 7th century BCE. There are discussions and debates to be had here about this, but we don't have time for it right now. But we'll just say during this time period, and this person wrote the book of Deuteronomy. If you somehow dupe me into a Bible study of Deuteronomy at some point, we can talk about this writer. Or I may just leave the church. I don't know. I'm not sure which one. But there's so many good books in the Bible. Deuteronomy may not be top of my list to do a full. We can read parts of it, but the full Bible study of Deuteronomy is not in my wheelhouse or area of interest. So, but anyway, this guy wrote Deuteronomy, and there you go. There are good concepts of Deuteronomy and a shift in legal understandings in Deuteronomy that are important to Christians because Jesus is oftentimes working from a Deuteronomical, there we go, viewpoint. Right? But to hash through the whole thing, I think it's pretty painful. Anything else on that? Any thoughts on that? Did I break anybody's heart on Deuteronomy? Any big Deutero fans here? By the way, Deuteronomy literally means second law. This is Greek. Deutero is second. Nomos is law. So Deuteronomy. And last, and probably least, honestly, but
Now we can go back to the priesthood.
priestly, yeah.
I knew they were the newest, but I didn't know they were. But yeah,
Yeah.
you got to know that one. You can get older.
Priestly writer writes in the 5th century. The priestly writer cares about priestly things. What do priests care about? In theory,
Time.
time, measurements. Why do they care about time? Because they need to know when to have rituals, right? Rituals, ceremonies, holidays, etc., are bound to the movement of the stars, of the sun, of the moon. And so celestial bodies are big for the priests. Measurements, I heard someone say, because you got to know how big to build the tent or the ark or the temple or the whatever, right? So, you know, no one else cares about how big the ark needs to be, Ark of the Covenant or the Ark of Noah, but the priests do. And so, and also lineage. They often care a lot about lineage too. It's all about, you know, who's in, who's out, who's part of the faith, who's not, who's a Levi, who's not, who can be Kohen, a priest, who can't, etc. Any thoughts on that? And as we go along through this, we get a more and more transcendent, more and more lofty God. So by the time you get into the priestly writer, you're getting much closer to a full-fledged monotheism. Although I'd still say it's just a very high theism. One thing to remember about the Old Testament in general, it is a book written by followers of Yahweh. Right. And so you have the temple at Jerusalem. It's written by the adherents, members, devotees of the temple at Jerusalem. And this is also where the monarchy is, right? Jerusalem's the capital. And these things become tied together. So the Bible is very interested in the monarchy. And so you get King David as a reality or as a concept later on, and a desire to return to the monarchy. And the temple there is the temple to Yahweh. And so Yahweh takes prominence, although there are other deities being worshipped even in Jerusalem, and certainly within the larger context of Judah and Israel. There are also other temples to Yahweh scattered around, but because this one was connected to the monarchy, this one was given prominence, and they had the power of the monarchy behind them because this will also support through their power behind the monarchy. So it's a symbiotic relationship. But then you have things like Solomon coming along and erecting, for example, poles to Asherah. Asherah, who was the consort of Yahweh, female deity, female earth deity, and would erect poles. Her symbol was a pole, which is really actually a phallic symbol. It's really the symbol of the male deity, but you know it was the whole phallus and yoni symbol. It's an aside. Full discussion. Any questions on who wrote the Bible? What?
Just being sarcastic. Lots of people.
Lots of people, yes. Yeah, this is only the first 5 books, anyway. Yeah, and so down here we also have, we sort of put a R in parentheses for redactor, redactors. The people who over the years have edited things, they've separated things out, cut things out, inserted things, meshed things together. And so there's sometimes sort of connective words, bridging passages, etc., to try to move things around and shift things in certain ways. There you go. Y'all got this before I erase it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Last concept, this is from our 3rd session, is the cosmology of the Hebrew people and really the entire ancient Near East. Pretty much everyone had some close version of this is how the world is, this is how the world works, this is how the world works. And it's basically a snow globe look. We have the Earth here, which is flat. Everybody knows it's flat. Those NASA folks are lying to you. It's a big conspiracy. The moon landing was filmed on the studio in Burbank. We all know that, right? All right. And then over the Earth, you have the firmament. Actually, let's open the Bible. Let's go to Genesis 1:1. And the priestly writer, who cares about time and sequences of things and cosmology and stars and planets and all these things, he's the one going to tell you how it is. All right. So what's the priestly writer say? Somebody who wants to read.
I will. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters.
Great. Pause right there, please. This word deep in Hebrew is tehom. This is a very important concept to many things in the Bible. But tehom is the primordial waters. Or chaos waters. This is raw, pure chaos. Dark, cold, churning, disordered waters. They are salinic waters. Why is it salt water? Salt kills. Right? Nothing can grow in salt. So this is distinct. The water they're talking about here is distinct from the water you'd have in a lake or a stream or a river, right? Water that actually nourishes, or water that falls like rain. This is the water that kills. This is analogous to the ocean. And it's full of monsters and bad things and things that want to tear down the order that God is establishing. How do we know this? Well, a few reasons. We go in the ocean and we die, right? A little rickety wooden craft that works just fine on river. We get it out in the ocean, next thing you know, we're all dead, right? The chaos waters destroy us. The monsters lying beneath eat us. It's a bad thing, right? And also, if salt water creeps up into our crops, what happens? They die, right? And we talked before, just very quickly, there is the water table in this region It's very close under the ground, oftentimes Slonic, right? And so when the sporadic rain in that area, I said before that Jerusalem and London have the same annual rainfall in them. But as London gets it in that drizzly all the time sort of way, Jerusalem gets it all at once, just pouring down on you, right? So it's like a third of the amount of time that London gets theirs in. And so what happens is the rain hits, it moistens the earth, causes a capillary action, and sucks up the salinic water into the earth, right? And then leaves behind salt. Now you have unusable soil because of the salt water that's lying beneath the earth, right? And so this is personified by a sea creature, a chaos creature, known by many different names. It's always a Draco form creature of some sort, meaning dragon form, serpent form. In the Hebrew Bible, more often than not, it's called the Leviathan. Interesting enough, in modern Hebrew, Leviathan has become the word for whale. Great sea beastie, right? But in ancient language, it was a capital L thing, and the personification of chaos and primordial waste and death. You also get Lotan, which is, we're connected here. Tehom, the Babylonian name for this primordial deity, is Tiamat. In ancient religion, most of the time, if you have a god that represents civilization in some way, or some sort of human endeavor or human way of thinking, way of doing things, they'll look human. But when you get to the more primordial representations of nature or raw feeling or some sort of destructive energy or something like that, they often take a bestial form. Right? And for this area, you either have a Draco form thing, or you can also get Behemoth, which is the land version of this. Land thing that exists in the chaos wastes, which basically goes back to either a crocodile or a hippopotamus, the two most dangerous creatures for these people in this area, right? To this day, hippos kill more people than any other creature on Earth. Hippos are very dangerous. Or crocodiles. So anyway, Tiamat is this Draco form thing, and this word Tehom is derived from that. So T, E, and I class vowels are kind of the same thing in ancient language, in ancient Eastern languages. Then you get the H, and either the A or the O, and then the M. And I said that there's a superlative plural, right? Well, a T or TH is the plural, feminine plural. So we get Tehom as a derivation from Tiamat. Tiamat, again, is the personification of this concept. And of course, we have the great, heroic, ordered, good, lawful male deity, and the pure chaos, dark, wet, cold, conniving, destructive female deity, right? We all know that women are an issue, so there you go. For those who can't see, there's a whole room of women here. Not a single other person is male in this room, so I gotta dab them sometimes. No, but obviously, this is written by a very male perspective on a very ancient patriarchal male perspective. Right? With the same idea that exists in most ancient concepts, we have the idea of the yin and the yang, for example, in Asia, where the yin is feminine, it's dark, it's wet, it's cold, and we have the same idea here. All right, any thoughts on this? Okay, so this is Tehom. This is what the Spirit of the Lord or the breath of the Lord is hovering over, blowing over, moving over, etc. All right, keep going, please.
And God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day.
Yeah, thanks. Go on, please.
And God said, let there be an expanse between the waters, to separate water from water. So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it. And it was so. God called the expanse the sky. And there was evening and there was morning the second day.
Okay, one more, please. So this is called the firmament. And you'll see firmament other places. This is the expanse. And so you have waters everywhere around here, right? Waters everywhere around here. And so God has caused this firmament to appear that separates the waters from the waters, right? So you have waters above, waters below. Okay. And the firmament is elsewhere likened to being like a beaten bronze bowl. It's like a bowl that God set on top of stuff. All right, next please.
And God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear. And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good.
Great. So now he's drained out this area. So now we have earth separating out the waters below, a firmament separating the waters out above.
Let's see. Then God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds. And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it, according to their kinds.
Great, thank you. That'll be all, thank you. So what happens when you remove the salt water from the system? You can grow stuff now, right? Salt's out of the soil, get rid of the salt, you can grow stuff now. Also amongst this cosmology, you have pillars supporting this whole thing. You've got the pillars of the earth. This is what it's referring to. Pillars of the earth is a phrase from the Bible picked up in what is also a great novel. Also below here, you have somewhere amongst all this, you have Sheol, which is the underworld. So everybody knows when you die, what happens. Things die, they fall into the dirt, and they decompose, and they go into the dirt. So the dead hang out under here. Way up here in the high vaults of heaven. Heaven and sky are the same word in most every ancient language. So in the highest sky, in the highest heaven, the high vaults of heaven, you have God hanging out up here. Okay. Over here, you have some mountains kind of holding up the dome, like that. And that is the cosmology that pretty much everyone in the ancient Near East is looking from. Some sort of version of this. And this is just how we know things work. Okay. And in this firmament, God sets floodgates. As a foreshadowing, a portent of things to come, there are floodgates in the firmament, right? Which is why I said it's important to get the cosmology down before you talk about the flood. Right? And this whole thing, we're running time. 7 minutes. This whole thing is correlating to the way that city-states work. So you have God and your king Most ancient Near Eastern cultures, the god and the king are the same thing. The king was a deity. Think about, the Cyrus-Horus cycle for Egyptians. Think about all the Greco-Roman emperors who thought themselves to be gods, etc. Right? So the center of everything, you have God or a king. The king sets up a city. God sets up heaven, the kingdom of God, Eden, whatever, whatever walled enclosure that God is setting up. In the same way that the king sets up a walled enclosure of the city. And around this area, if you have a powerful king who has power and control and might, he can protect you. So this whole area becomes ordered, and this whole area is bound by law and a certain order of things. And when order takes place, you get civic improvements. You get patrols of troops that keep the brigands and the beasts at bay. You're going to kill off the hippopotami and the crocodiles and like that threaten you. You're going to run off the brigands. You're going to have some safety in here, right? And you're also going to have agriculture. This allows agriculture to take place as well. So in this kind of crazy weather patterns, the salt coming from the earth, the crazy deluges going through here, water is an issue. And so you get development of cisterns and aqueducts and irrigation and dams like that, right? So all these systems that can only exist when you have a strong king at the center, a strong society, taxes, people to work on them, etc., that allow these systems to be put in place that keep everything ordered and in control. But when the king gets weak and chaos starts encroaching back in, all this falls apart. Right? The farms get destroyed, you can't get crops anymore, everyone starves to death, the brigands start robbing you, the crocodiles start eating you again, and it's chaos again. So you always have chaos trying to encroach in on the order of law. And so ultimately what you have in the Old Testament is not so much good versus evil, which is kind of what you get by the time you get to the New Testament, but you have order versus chaos.
Right.
All right, got 5 minutes. Any thoughts on all this?
Okay, I don't need to keep segueing off onto other things.
Great.
But I have been binge watching The Crown.
Okay.
And in The Crown, when the characters, I'm going to say characters, of Philip and Charles are going through their investiture, what they are pledging to the Queen, in this case Elizabeth II, is that she is divine and they are in her service. Now, is there a modern day counterpart to what all of this that you have been describing? Is this a holdover
Yes.
in the mental mindset of man?
Yes, absolutely. The King James Bible, written by King James, the whole point of that translation was to strengthen the monarchy. So the language there is shifted hard into monarchical language. For example, in the Lord's Prayer, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever, amen, is not, if you'll ever notice, in what Jesus prays.
Right.
When Jesus teaches the disciples how to pray, he does not say that. That was a insertion in the King James Bible. The kingdom and the power and the glory are all kingly concepts. They want to have those things, right? And so what King James, is the divinely mandated monarch, God himself has ordained that he and his line are to be the monarch. and therefore I am second only to God, and I'm lifted above all other people, and I have this divine right. And so this divine power, divine majesty, divine glory becomes mine by birthright. In the same way, we talked about Jerusalem. This is going to be an example of pretty much every other city-state, every other capital in ancient Near East. Right? So Jerusalem is where the monarch is, right? Also where the temple to Yahweh is. Like I said, these become a symbiotic relationship. The temple says, hey, King David, you're our boy. God has ordained you to be monarch. David's like, yeah, I think he has. That sounds about right. You know, I like the way that you think. I think I'll throw my military might behind you, right? Because you're supporting me, I'm going to support you. And thus begins the church and state connection. And so the reason that we have such, now again, do not hear that I think that there is no God or that God is not all-powerful or whatever. I firmly believe in a monotheistic, all-powerful deity. But the reason we receive that concept so strongly in the Hebrew scriptures, and not to me discordant voices to that, is because of this relationship. Because they uplift Yahweh to be the king of the gods, in the same way that David and his progeny are uplifted to be the king amongst other people. And so they support each other, right? The same thing happens with, in Egypt, where the cult of Osiris, a cult, by the way, the term cult is when you worship one aspect of a religion above all the other aspects of a religion, right? It doesn't mean crazy Kool-Aid drinking people. And in a way that the cult of Yahweh, the temple cult of Yahweh, worship Yahweh above all the other Semitic deities that were out there. So we have the same thing going on in Egypt, where depending on where you are in Egypt's history, you have certain gods uplifted. You have Ra sometimes, you have Osiris sometimes, you have Amon-Ra sometimes, Amon for one brief shining moment. But whatever it is, that's because the center of power has shifted to a city for whom that deity is the tutelary deity, the main deity. And so that deity becomes powerful along with the king who's there. They support each other. Same thing happens with Marduk and Babylon, where the king and later emperor in Babylon is a literal representation of Marduk. He is Marduk on earth, right? For the same reasons. And yes, so because England was a Christian, is I guess still, the Queen's still the defender of the faith, right? As a Christian nation, they have these concepts of monarchy and divinity and divine mandate of the monarchy still inherent in their concepts of why the Queen is the Queen. Right? We have a major eye roll from the democracy fan over here, I guess.
There are no words.
Well, I mean, even now, like, if you asked, I would say a large number of people who vote for Trump, you have a lot of the Pentecostal folks who were supporting Trump, saying that Trump was God's chosen representation. I'm not here to say he was or wasn't. What I'm saying is a lot of the Pentecostals who were voting for Trump did so because they thought that he was God's chosen representation for the United States, right? Because he was bringing Christianity back or Christian values back or whatever else they thought. Right? So a lot of times,
And on that note.
well, I mean, think about, I think in general, people think God's on their side, right? I think, people, I'm a good person. I do what I think's best. I think God is good. I like to think that God's on my side. God has my back. I think there's a lot of that thought. And whether you're a king or a priest or whatever else, like I like to think that when I'm preaching on Sunday mornings, I'm preaching what God would want me to preach,
We want to think the same thing.
I know. Let's just all think that. We just all agree to think that. We said that. No, but seriously, like, I mean, that's my prayer before I think of, before I work my sermon, I always pray, God, please inspire me, like empty me out and fill me up with whatever you want me to say, whatever you need your people to hear. Let me say that, let them hear that. And, I'm trying to get out of the way of myself and let God speak. But who knows? Like I hope so, do the best I can. But I'm sure I foul up. I'm sure I mess it up. So, I think we're all, the kings are more egregious because they have more power. If you gave any of us enough power, we become more and more egregious as we get more and more power, right? The more power, the more wealth, the more whatever, the bigger of a jerk you are. That's just how it works. Because you're able to exert your own ego out in the world, right? Or I guess your own potential, the potential for you to become a jerk is much greater, right? There are definitely good, very good, powerful, very good rich people out there, but yeah, the possibility is bigger. All right, is that it?
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.